Before the posthumous publication of the Silmarillion, the tale of Beren and Luthien was the only part of Tolkien's history of the First Age of Middle-earth that was known in any detail to the general public. In Chapter 9 of The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn outlines the tale to an audience of 4 listening hobbits, and recites a poem on the subject of the meeting of the two lovers, derived from earlier drafts going back to the 1920s. And later, in the Pass of Cirith Ungol, Frodo and Sam discuss the plot in a manner which clearly implies their deeper acquaintance with the story. Indeed, by the time he came to write The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien had already substantially completed the tale in a detailed outline, which formed the basis for the published Silmarillion version, and an expanded poem in rhymed couplets, which extended to over 4,000 lines before its abrupt cessation at the end of what constitutes Scene 7 of these epic scenes. These versions represented a substantial advance on the earlier lost tale, where, among other elements, Beren was an elf who was imprisoned not by Sauron, but the Prince of Cats, and the involvement of Finrod Felagund as King of Nargothrond was entirely missing. After the completion of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien returned to the Lay of Luthien, as he entitled this gigantic poetic treatment of the myth, not continuing the story from the point where it had been abandoned, but going right back to the beginning and rewriting it on an even larger scale. At the same time, he prepared a still unpublished prose version of the narrative, which was closely modelled on the wording of the rewritten lay. This revised version petered out just after the initial meeting of Beren and Luthien, though Tolkien did furnish some relatively brief further expansions for subsequent sections in the poem. At that point, he seems to have ceased to work on the myth any further, although there were some minor revisions to the summary given in the Grey Annals, written at about the same time, and there are none of the later expansions and rewritings that we find in the development of the Children of Húrin, Feanor, or the Fall of Gondolin. Nonetheless, the fact remains that the complete story of Beren and Luthien, as we have it, constitutes a very substantial body of writing indeed, and not all of this could be included even in Christopher Tolkien's 1-volume edition of the legend, published in 2017. In a similar way, the epic scenes presented here have perforce had to make substantial abridgments of the text, and this in turn has necessitated some reassignment of dialogue. Moreover, I have taken advantage of Tolkien's own clear intention of rendering at least some of his verse into prose, to do the same at points where the scheme of rhymed couplets might seem inappropriate. A fuller description of the manner in which the text was selected is to be found on my website, but it should be observed that the fact that Beren and Luthien was the last of the series of epic scenes to be completed arose in part from the sheer difficulty of finding a suitable construction for the text as a whole. The Lay of Luthien begins with an extensive introduction to the kingdom of Doriath, the marriage of the elven king Thingol with the semi-divine Melian, and a description of their daughter Luthien. The epic scenes, however, plunges immediately into the midst of the action, with the Battle of Sudden Flame, where Morgoth breaks the siege of his stronghold of Angband and wins his first victory over the elves, who have pursued him with the intention of recovering their great jewels, the Silmarils, which has been described in the first set of epic scenes, Feanor. The narrative describing the battle also introduces the character of Morgoth's Lieutenant Sauron, who leads his armies in their assault. course of the battle, Finrod Felagund, the elven king of Nargothrond, is surrounded by the forces of Morgoth and is rescued by a force of men led by Beren. In the original version of the legends, this is Beren's father Barahir, but the story is condensed here in the interests of simplicity. Finrod swears an oath to assist Beren, in need, if the occasion should arise in the future, and in token of his promise, he gives to Beren his ring. Meanwhile, we are introduced to Gorlim, one of Beren's followers who has been captured by Sauron and who is tempted by the latter's offer to reunite him with his wife and free him to live in peace. Gorlim, deceived by Sauron's wiles and promises, betrays his leader, but then Sauron reveals that his wife is already dead and that Gorlim's reunion with her is to be his own execution.
Nonetheless, I will grant thy prayer, and thou shalt go now unto Elinel, and lie in her bed, and be set free of my service, and be released from pain and woe.
Meanwhile, Beren, fearing that Gorlim is already lost, is seeking safety in flight and concealment, and he sings of his loneliness and fear in a passage which derives from my earlier song, The Mystery, which can be heard in its original form on the CD collection Akalabeth. The wraith of Gorlim appears to him in a dreamlike apparition, warning him to flee, and the music of the song is transformed into a violent outburst where Beren swears revenge and takes safety in flight. Chorus takes up this theme and describes his passage through the mountains towards the hidden kingdom of Doriath, through spider-haunted passes and other perils, which Tolkien only describes in retrospect during the later revisions of the Lay of Luthien. With the arrival of Beren in Doriath, however, we reach the central image of Tolkien's legend, Beren's first sight of the elven maid Luthien dancing in a glade of hemlocks, and the immediate love he conceives for her, a scene inspired by an incident in Tolkien's own life when his wife Edith danced for him in a woodland glade in Yorkshire. This event also led him to write a few years later his poem Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, which formed the earliest draft of the song that Aragorn was to sing in The Lord of the Rings. It also features briefly in the extended DVD edition of the Peter Jackson film of The Fellowship of the Ring. That song forms the principal theme of the love scene that follows, first sung by the chorus, accompanied only by the on-stage flute played by Diaron, the minstrel of Doriath, who is himself enamoured of Luthien. This theme interweaves itself throughout the following succession of depictions of Beren's year-long pursuit of Luthien through the forest. Interspersed with it are her Song in Elvish, a poem derived from the revised Lay of Luthien, Beren's declaration of love, Luthien's dances, the winter which hides her from Beren, and finally his seduction of her with the return of spring. The final section of the love scene combines Daren's flute melody with Beren's declaration of love, before the return of the Lord of the Rings text, and finally a reference to Beren's Scene 2 Song of Despair, now transformed into the sweetest of benedictions. This passage brings to an end the first of the triptychs, the set of 3 scenes which constitutes the first part of the tale, and also the only section that Tolkien substantially revised following the completion of The Lord of the Rings in 1949. For the second triptych, the text is drawn entirely from the earlier version of the Lay of Luthien and the condensed version of the tale published in the Silmarillion. It opens with a full statement of the theme associated with the elves in Feanor, which is now linked with the kingdom of Doriath itself and its rulers, the elven king Thingol and his spouse Melian. Beren is brought before Thingol and declares his love for Luthien. Thingol is horrified at the thought of his immortal daughter binding her fate to a base-born mortal, and declares that such presumption is worthy of death. But he is warned by Melian that his fate is bound with that of Beren, and he is impressed when Beren displays to him the ring given to him by Finrod Felagund. Instead, he declares to the presumptuous suitor that he is willing to set a price on his daughter's hand, that Beren should bring to him a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, an errand which is likely to prove fatal without Thingol himself breaking his pledge to his daughter. The theme of the Silmarils now returns from its original appearance in Feanor. Beren laughingly accepts his price. When they meet again, he declares, his hand will hold a Silmaril. He departs on his quest, leaving Thingol and Melian to meditate darkly on the fate of Middle-earth, in which they are now inextricably entwined. In Scene 5, Beren appears before Finrod Felagund to seek for his promised aid. Finrod regards himself as bound by his oath, but the sons of Feanor reiterate their oath to pursue to the death anyone who seeks to seize or claim one of the Silmarils. In Tolkien's story, the web of narrative, which describes the actions of Celegorm and Curufin, the 2 sons of Feanor involved in this subplot, is lengthy and involved, including some marvellous sarcastic confrontations of the 2 brothers with Finrod and his brother Orodreth, an attempt on Beren's life, and the kidnapping of Luthien. But in the course of these epic scenes, this extensive supplementary tale is perforce reduced, and the brothers and their wolfhound Huan, who would have been difficult to realise in stage performances, are eliminated altogether. Here Finrod, as in the original story, sets off with Beren on his quest, but the sixth scene begins with the pair, disguised as orcs, being interrogated by Sauron. At first, the latter accepts their false identities, but he soon grows suspicious and, to the same daunting theme which he had earlier employed in his questioning of Gorlim, he strips their disguise from them. Cast into Sauron's dungeons, Beren volunteers to disclose their errand in the hope of saving Finrod's life, but the latter assures him that this will make no difference to their fate. When a wolf appears in the dungeon, Finrod advances to meet it and slays it at the cost of his own life. As he dies, he bids farewell to Beren, to the theme that had been associated in Feanor with the curse of Mandos, of death to the elvish exiles. And the woodwind echo his final words with the setting of the word namarie, farewell, which had been written by Tolkien himself when he recorded Galadriel's lament from The Lord of the Rings in 1951. It is at this point that there occurs a most peculiar omission in all of Tolkien's texts, most noticeably of all in the Lay of Luthien. In all versions of the story, it is stated that Luthien, arriving outside Sauron's stronghold, sang a song to which the imprisoned Beren responded. But curiously, although Tolkien provides lengthy lyrics from most other points in his narrative, he does not do so here. I accordingly took the cue from a similar dramatic context of Sam searching for Frodo in the Tower of Cirith Ungol to incorporate my already written song In Western Lands from The Lord of the Rings into the text at this point, only making one minor change to substitute Luthien's nightingales for Sam's more bucolic merry finches in the first verse, and removing a musical reference to the Shire. And the series of descending chords, which opens the song, was taken up into the body of the work as a theme of death, which pursues the characters.
Beneath
Luthien overcomes Sauron and banishes him, rescuing Beren from his dungeon and resolving to accompany him on the quest for the Silmaril. As will be noted, the action of Tolkien's original story here, with Beren's attempts to avoid leading Luthien into danger and the advice and assistance of the wolfhound Huan, is considerably simplified and abridged, maintaining the emphasis on the two lovers in their duet at the end of the second triptych. And the third triptych transports the listener immediately to Morgoth's stronghold of Angband, and a stern chorus opens the scene with a description of the fortress itself. Actually, this is a completely different poem, with only tangential reference to the Silmarillion legends. It describes an abandoned elven city, but it suits its context well, and the chorus introduces a chromatically twisted theme which will recur many times with reference to the machinations of Morgoth. Luthien assists Beren to overcome the wolf Karcheroth, who seeks to bar their entrance, and the two of them descend to confront the Dark Lord himself. Luthien wheedles him with flattery, and even with the temptation of her beauty, and offers to dance for him, which he does with increasing ferocity, in an expansion and transformation of her innocent dance in the moonlit glade in the first triptych. She casts a spell of sleep upon the whole gathering, and Morgoth falls from his throne with his crown at her feet. Beren cuts a Silmaril from its setting, but as he does so there is a crack of thunder and Morgoth awakes. Beren and Luthien flee, and when Beren attempts to defy Karcheroth with the aid of the Silmaril, the wolf bites off his hand with a jewel still clasped within it. An interlude, describing their flight borne by eagles, leads us back to the hidden kingdom of Doriath. Beren bids a long and sad farewell to the sounds of nature and to Luthien herself, but the latter assures him that she will follow him even through the doors of death. Their duet culminates in a united apostrophe to their love. and when Thingol and his court finally reappear, Beren is able to assure him that his quest has been achieved. A Silmaril is indeed in his hand, although the hand itself is now within the belly of the wolf. At this point, Tolkien extends the story with considerable further detail, elucidating how the wolf bursts into the woodlands of Doriath and is slain, restoring the Silmaril to Beren and Thingol. But the poem of the Lay of Luthien concludes before the flight of Beren and Luthien from Angband, so the only version of the tale is the abridged version from the 1937 Silmarillion, where there is almost no dialogue available to serve as musical material. The music, accordingly, moves directly from the death of Beren to the appearance of Luthien before the throne of Mandos, where she pleads for the restoration of Beren to life. Again, Tolkien supplies no text for this climactic poem, but a solitary sketch, noted a fragment from the end of the poem, does provide a wistful patch of meditation which fits the situation well, intertwined with the music which we have already heard as Luthien promised to follow Beren even to death. The alternating chords associated with Mandos himself lead to a gradual fading of the scene, and the chorus of unseen voices bring a final return of the theme of the love scene which framed the first meeting of the two lovers, together with the final words of Aragorn's reminiscence of the story from The Lord of the Rings. It will be noted that each of the triptychs which make up these epic scenes contains an extensive duet focused on the two lovers, but each of these have a marked difference in treatment and approach. In a second talk, I will examine these transitions in greater detail, together with some other aspects of the musical treatment.